Now, there's a fella by the name of Carl Johan Calleman. He's a Swedish microbiologist. For 30 years, he's worked in laboratories, looking through microscopes at smaller and smaller particles or parts of life. Okay, very exacting, meticulous work. Most of his work had to do with entomology, with pollution and its effects on the cell and how it causes diseases. That's most of his work. And he was inspired by a visit down to the Maya lands to start studying the Mayan calendar. He took it up as a hobby to begin with, but he started studying it with his clinical techniques to find out what he could prove about the calendar rather than what he thought or conjectured about the calendar, which is what's all been going on so far. All the archaeologists have their own idea, and they kind of match up with other people's ideas about what this was all about. Mr. Calleman took a different route. I myself am an artist, a sculptor. I'm not an archaeologist or didn't even go to school much. I'm an artist, and I was approaching the calendar from more of a heart space or intuitive space. And when I came up with this, Calleman saw it in Sweden, and he sent me this. And we eventually met in Cancun. And when we put our two informations together, the product is this talk. Okay? What Calleman found is what these guys were timing. They certainly weren't timing any physical cycles of things in our solar system. What were they timing? Okay. There's a stone in a place called Koba. I hope you can see this. Maybe you can focus in with the camera on this, so at least it's on the video. This is only one side of the stone. It actually goes over and down like this. It's big. This thing stands 12 feet high out of the ground. I don't know how much it goes into the ground, but it's 12 feet high. It's over 7 feet wide. It's that thick. Big rock. The archaeologists found it in the late 40s, laying face down in the jungle. And when they stood it up, it had all these carvings all over it, all these Mayan dates, and a king who stands right here. But all of these dates have to do with the Tune calendar. It's numbers of those cycles, okay? Numbers of times those cycles have happened. And it's big, big numbers. We'll be talking about it in a minute. When the stone was first stood up, the archaeologists did a rubbing of, a charcoal rubbing. And it's a good thing they did, because when the stone dried out from having laid in the jungle for so long, it just, you can't read it now. Madeline and I have been there. We stood right by the stone. I kissed the stone. I really did. And you can't read anything on it. In fact, when it was first rubbed, the archaeologists didn't know what it meant either. But since we have then translated the writing, and now we can read it with the aid of computers, you can read it just like a newspaper. And what that stone says is the structure of the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar is in 9 different levels. Okay, does that look like a pyramid to you? That's good. That's why all those pyramids down there are all 9 levels. Because those big structures that the Maya built out of stone were ceremonial centers to approximate or to show people the progression up this ladder or up these steps. I'm going to write bigger. It also shows that each one of these levels is subdivided into 13 individual sections. Now there goes that top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the Mayan calendar, there are 7 periods of light in each one of these levels. There's 7 periods of light. And there's 6 periods of dark. 7 days and 6 nights to each level of creation. Where have we heard that before? Genesis? As a matter of fact, the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians, the first people to write, wrote in cuneiform form on clay tablets that each level of creation had 7 days and 6 nights. So the Maya weren't the first people to have this information. There were other civilizations earlier. But the Maya were the most recent ancient civilization. They left the freshest tracks, which is why Calleman and I have picked up on it. Okay? The days, each day is a period of enlightenment or increase in consciousness. And each night is a period of applying that consciousness. You've done that all your life. You've learned something new and then went out and applied it, haven't you? You get all excited about something you just learned, and then you run out and you do it. Interesting, during that application, sometimes you learn what you didn't already know. These are called mistakes. Where you go out, you get all excited, and you learn about it. Remember, guys, when we first learned about hammer, wood, and nails? And how to put things together. You just pounding boards together. And you, bam! Ow! Now you know something more than you did before. We'll see that sometimes during this application stage, there's things that look like mistakes. But it's all part of the learning process, isn't it? So this very first cycle that was carved some 2,500 years ago on this rock started 16.4 billion, that's billion with a B, billion years ago. This is why this information hasn't been studied by the archaeologists. The archaeologists could not conceive of why Indians making pots in the jungle would have any business thinking about 16.4 billion years. So they just put it on the shelf and nobody else looked at it until Calleman came along. In fact, when this stone was unearthed, the astronomers, the guys that was looking out into the galaxies, they had postulated that the universe, the Big Bang, happened somewhere between 20 and 10 billion years ago. And then later, as we got better and better telescopes, we could see further out into the... And then they went, well, no, it wasn't 20, it was like 12 billion years ago, and that was it. So this was impossible. Well, now we've updated Hubble, and we've found that there are things out there 14.5 billion years old. I bet you that in the next few years, we're going to find out that the Maya had it right on. That the Big Bang happened 16.4 billion of our years ago. Understand that this is an exact number of tunes of 360-day cycles, but when you work it to our year, it gets to a fraction. Okay. This whole cycle, 16.4 billion years, is divided into 13 different sections. Each one of them 1.26 billion years long. So a day in this cycle was 1.25 billion years. And each night lasted for 1.25 billion years. Okay? Each one of these has a particular intention in creation. We won't go into that right now, but each one of them has a particular intention. And it's followed all these intentions all the way across. This cycle has a name for its product, what it produced. It's called the cellular cycle. Because way over here, at the very, very end, in this last section, in the seventh day, what happened 1.26 billion years ago is the first live cell on this planet. Now, up until that time, consciousness was very busy. Consciousness was busy creating or doing business. You know, it had a particular mode by which it was operating. And it was operating in the mode of action, reaction. I'll just abbreviate it here. But action, reaction was this whole cycle. Chemical, gravitational, frictional, all of the physical laws that we understand and still use today, all of those things were established from the Big Bang forward. Then we'll go through some of the detail of what happened in these in just a minute. The very next cycle, carved on that rock, started 820 million years ago. 820 million years ago. And it started going through these same 13 steps. Each one of those steps taking 63.4 million years each. This one was 1.26 billion years each. This one's only 63.4 million years each. Yes?
A day to a day?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. And the answer is, creation has the deck stacked in consciousness's favor. We go from a day to another day. Okay? This whole cycle, 820 million years, fits very tidily into 1.26 billion, doesn't it? This whole cycle fits in that box very comfortably. Does that make sense? So we got all the way over here to this last light, and then we got another light. And this started a whole nother process. This has a name for its product. Mammalian cycle. Why? Because 63.4 million years ago, what happened? The first live Earths. Now back here, right at this line, individual cells started clumping together for cooperation for better survival. And then they evolved stage by stage by stage into more and more complex organisms. And when you go to study this on your own, because we're not going to drag you through all the detail, or we might as well just talk about the book, you know. It's better for you to study the detail on your own. But you'll find that all the developments of individual cells into shell life, into fishes, into reptiles, into birds, and finally into mammals and then us, all of that went stage by stage by stage. It's not a coincidence. We're on a schedule. And it's provable by the historic record, the paleontological record. You have the center right here. The mastodons and what's called the Bernage. Yeah. What is it again? Beringia? Beringia Center. And you can go and confirm this for yourself. Here we go. This whole consciousness cycle had a way of doing business too. It's called stimulus response. All of this consciousness was building on a survival tool or a method called stimulus response. It's still working now. That's because we're still living in this 1.26 billion years. And those laws that were established then are still working. That's a level of consciousness, a foundation. Here, we built the consciousness of stimulus response and mammals. I see a whole lot of mammals out there. We're still living in this 63.4 million years. The next cycle started 41 million years ago. It's called the familiar cycle. Familial. It has to do with the families. Monkeys showed up 40 million years ago, right near the very beginning of this cycle. And what monkeys did is they brought along a consciousness, the consciousness of stimulus, individual response. Individual response. Down here we had hives and nests and swarms and schools and herds and flocks. And you've seen enough wildlife to know if you startle them, the whole herd, boom, off like a shot, right? The whole school of fish, the whole pile of ants. It's all stimulus response, everybody goes. In this case, though, in these stages, each one of them 3.2 million years long, the monkeys and their ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors built the concept of family. What's the difference between a family and a herd? The recognition of the individual. And it is definitely a survival tool. You're much more flexible as an individual, much more choice of how to survive rather than being one of the pack. Right now, I dare say, in our societies and world, there are a lot of people who would have you give up your individuality. Get in line, sit down, shut up, and become one of the pack. Don't do it. Creation has invested a lot into you attaining your individuality. Don't throw it away. Thanks. Okay, 2 million years ago, we started a new cycle. This is called the tribal cycle. Not so coincidentally, 2 million years ago, right at this line, Australopithecus showed up, the first tailless ape. A really distant ancestor of ours. But as we came through all these 13 stages, we went further and further toward Homo erectus and then Homo sapien, which showed up 160,000 years ago. Each one of these is 160,000 years. So 160,000 years ago was the beginning of this seventh day, and that is when Homo sapien showed up. We are on a schedule. Now, this whole This whole cycle was producing a certain kind of consciousness or a tool for survival, and that was similarities and differences. The mind. Here, we put down the tail and picked up the mind as a survival tool. The tail was a very useful survival tool down here. Down here, fangs and claws were good. But here, the tail, here, the mind. And the mind is a tool to look or notice the similarities and differences in things and in circumstances. Not to just react, but to decide. Okay? To decide. Much more powerful tool for survival. Then, 102,000 years ago, we started another cycle. The cultural cycle. This cultural cycle, had its own brand of consciousness. And this brand of consciousness was reasons. Now, it started off in the caves, way back here, 102,000 years ago. People huddled around the fire in front of the cave. And one guy, who eventually would become called the shaman, he came up with the reasons for things. He came up with the reason for rain, the reason for stars, the reason for the moon, the reason for fire. He had the reasons. If you really, really look at it, the basis of culture is shared reasons. Like an Islamic person, the reason he lives is for Allah. A Christian, he lives for Christ. That's his reason. The foundation of all cultures is shared reasons for things. And what happened here is these cycles, each one of these different divisions, each of them being almost, I'm rounding it up, but they're almost 8,000 years for each one of these days or nights. What happened way over here, 8,000 years ago, we developed agriculture. Agriculture. Well, there have been lots of them, actually, along the way. So, here we are, next cycle. 3115 BC is when this one started. It's called the national cycle. Because the modern nation was produced from this consciousness. Each one of these steps or stages is 397, almost 400 years. 3115 BC, by the way, is when we learned to write. So all of this is her story, and from here on up, it's his story. Also, right on this line, right on that line, is when King Minos of the Upper and Lower Nile cultures married the two cultures into the first nation called Egypt. Right there. And ever since then, there has been this evolution of the concept of nations, borders, tariffs, armies. Law. Law. This whole consciousness was about law. And if you have studied the Hebrew Bible, This 3115 BC date is awfully close to when the Hebrew Bible states Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden and into the consciousness of right and wrong, crime and punishment. You see, down here, there wasn't right or wrong. There was just reasons. There was reasons for things. There were certainly consequences for your actions. They happened for reasons. But there wasn't a law. There wasn't some guy going to come and beat your head in. You know? It was natural happenstances and natural consequences rather than human-imposed sanctions. That started right there and has evolved to where we are right now. And we'll go into just a little bit of detail about these different cycles, how they evolved. The next one is called the planetary consciousness. It started in 1755 AD. Remember your European history? What was happening 1755 AD? Ooh, the Industrial Revolution started in Europe. Each one of these days and nights were 19.7 of our years. Okay? Each one of these days and nights. And this whole consciousness cycle from 1755 up to today and into tomorrow is all about one thing: power. Raw, unmitigated power. This is when we started coming up with machines to do the work of men and animals. The water wheels, and then steam power, and then electrical power, and then internal combustion, and then nuclear, and it has evolved stage by stage by stage. We're on a schedule. This line right here, this line, the beginning of this seventh day, was 1992. What happened in 1992? www.com. The internet went up in 1992, manifesting a planetary consciousness. It is now a global consciousness. And it turned on right there at the very beginning of the seventh day. Either we've got a 16.4 billion year long string of coincidence, or we're on a schedule. The next cycle on that rock is one that we've just recently started. It's called the galactic consciousness cycle. If you think I'm kidding, get over that. Do we have a national consciousness? Are we living as part of that? Do we have a planetary consciousness? The galactic consciousness cycle started January 5th, 1999. And ever since then, we've been finding lots more out about our galaxy, haven't we? We're now finding other planets around other stars. We've now mapped our entire galaxy. We now know the density of the center of the galaxy. We have discovered the black hole in the center. we're finding out a lot more, much, much quicker than ever before. And these days and nights, each day and each night lasts for 360 days. I saw some light bulbs go on out there. Let me go ahead and do this one right here. I'm going to go into what is coming. There's another cycle coming. The universal consciousness cycle. Again, I'm not kidding. Universal consciousness cycle. It begins on February 10th, 2011. During this consciousness cycle, each one of these shifts and changes will last for, or will take 20 days. This galactic consciousness cycle started January 5th, 1999. It has a type of consciousness that it is operating under or developing. And that type of consciousness, in case you haven't already noticed, ethics. What is happening to the power elite corporations that are in power across this planet? What is happening to them right now? They're getting in a lot of hot water. Their ethics are being put in, aren't they? Yes?
Something that I've noticed is I've myself have gotten involved in a few different MLM companies and been watching what's been going on. And it's really interesting how a company will start up and they seem to have integrity and everybody says, oh, this is great, and they all jump on board. And the minute they lose integrity, it is amazing how many people just are gone from that company, lost their integrity, they have no ethics, and people are leaving them in masses.
Yes. Consciousness is not just us. Consciousness is this pen, the air you're breathing, the tree standing outside. Consciousness is all of creation. It's not just people. Consciousness is everything. Just a moment. Really get the mic over here. Consciousness is everything, and everything is oriented to ethics. Yes?
What was the event that precipitated the advent of the galactic consciousness?
There wasn't, no. Consciousness first, then event. It goes consciousness, light, thought, event. Well, remember what you were doing January 5th? January 5th of 99? Do you remember what you were doing? As a matter of fact, that's when you were first hearing about Y2K. That's when that consciousness that your systems that you're dependent upon are not all that reliable was planted during that period of time. That consciousness that the power you rely on is not the end all of your existence, and that it could all go away in just a microsecond. That consciousness was January 5th, 1999, if you were looking for an event. Okay. And we've come further and further along. Right now, by the way, we're in this cycle. We're in the third night. We'll talk much more in depth about this particular stage that we're in right now. In this cycle, we're down there. Okay? This universal consciousness cycle will have its own purpose, and that purpose is conscious co-creation. Conscious co-creation. Now, it's pretty evident that we are already co-creating our experience. For instance, if you weren't here, this event wouldn't be happening, would it? If any one of you were gone, it wouldn't be the same experience, would it? So we are all co-creating our experience all of the time. We're usually not as conscious about it as we could be, though. And where this is all leading is to our full ability to consciously co-create our experience. That's a big idea. And we're going to build some more groundwork on how that happens and how it can possibly happen.